Hello, everyone. So today, um, start the discussion of our other half of chromaticism for Music 102, which is we've had this thing going on so far. We've had fives of fives, right? Which the secondary dominance is what we were calling them, right? Where you have this five of five or five of six, you're acting like the five chord in another key. Today, we're going to do the other half of that, which is what we call secondary leading tone chords. The good news is all of the principles that you've learned so far apply to these. They're just a couple of little quirks and tricks. And you'll see like they function in the same way. They do basically the same thing. They're creating that little time warp, that emphasis on another chord to make it sound, slightly more important. That word we were using was tonicization. So secondary leading tone chords, why does this work, right? So why do we have two different types of them? If you remember back to, the introductory levels of theory, right, when we were talking about like function of chords, right? So we have the predominant function, tonic function, and we have dominant function. There were two dominant function chords, right? There's the five, which we also called the dominant, right? The five chord. But then there was also the seven. And the seven we were calling dominant function because it is. And that's generally what it does. When you have a seven chord in a diatonic key, it does what dominant chords do. Usually it goes to one. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's really cool. But for the most part, that's how it works, right? Because of that, we can have this parallel in chromaticism that we have secondary dominance as fives, but we also have secondary leading tone chords that are using sort of fulfilling the same role in music. The reason why that works, like just as a refresher, right, is because the five and the seven are basically the same chord, right? They're like one tone apart. So if you take a look at this one here, right, this 5, 7, and C, you get G, B, D, F. That has a leading tone, right, and a seventh. Those resolve correctly, all that good stuff, right? And this is kind of where you've been for the last week or so, 2 weeks, working with secondary function, right? Except for this would have been like of something, but you were dealing with chords that look like that. If you step over here and we look at the 7 half diminished 7, that's the diatonic chord, right? If you go to scale degree 7 and C, you build up your chord, you get B, D, F, A, and it does the same thing. The leading tone now is the root of the chord, and that goes up, right? And then the chord seventh wants to resolve down. But if you look at these two chords, they're basically the same, right? There's a B in each one, there's a D in each one, there's an F in each one. The difference is that this one has a G and this one has an A. So they have a whole step difference, right? Obviously they like have a different root, like that's different, but like the pitches are very, very similar. And that's going to be the case for any key. And that's sort of why we lump them together, right? They have the same secondary function because they have the same function. Okay, so looking at this, right, this is what we've been doing so far. Right, this is a D major 5, 7, and 5, right? And you would have been given this maybe on a homework or something for analysis, and you think, okay, cool. This is the new leading tone in A, right? That's going to resolve up, and say maybe you part wrote this, right? You put in the G sharp because you're pulling that from the key of the 5, which is A, and it resolves up, and this all is fine, right? It's exactly the same thought process if we wanted to do a 7 half diminished 7 of 5, right? The only thing we're changing is what's above here. We're not changing the thought process of what's below here. And that's the important thing, right? That all of that knowledge that you've built, right, is going to be exactly the same. You're still thinking about the key of under the slash, as I've been calling it in the videos and talking to you about on your homework. The only difference is you're spelling a different chord here. The function and like the way that chord is working is exactly the same. So instead of saying, I want to build a 5, 7 in this key, you want to say, okay, in the key of the 5, right, which is A, you want to think, what is 7 half diminished 7? Like what is that chord? And how do you think of that chord? Like what's the thought process? Well, you think, right, I want to build 7 in this key. Well, you think, okay, what is scale degree 7? Because that's the root. Right, and you think, okay, in A, scale degree 7, that's 3 sharps, fat cats go, that would be G sharp. And then you stack up thirds in the key of A on that chord, right? So it'd be G sharp, B, D, and this is an F sharp, right? And that's your chord. That's it. In a way, I think these are easier because if you saw the E's there that we get, it's not, oh, okay, we're in the key of the 5 and that key, what is 5? Where you have to like think off fifths and stuff like that. You could just think, oh, we're in the key of the 5. We're building a chord built on 7. So you just go down a half step, right? And that's going to be the root, which is nice. It's less like jumping, less leaping. Cool. Again, thought process, exactly the same. What's the key under the slash? We're looking at the X. And then here, we're going to have, we call a bifurcation, a split. And this is not the only way to think of this, but this is the way I want you to think of this, okay? It's going to make it easier. It may seem a little cumbersome at first, but I promise, like long term, this is much more fluent and faster if you can get this kind of in your mind and just like practice the sort of crunching algorithmic process. Okay, so what's the key under the slash, right? Great, we're looking at that. In this case, up here, it was A. And then you need to ask yourself, are you writing a 7 fully diminished 7 or a 7 half diminished 7? Okay, if you're writing a 7 half diminished 7, you want to think of the major key under the slash. So let's look at this one again, right? We're writing 7 half diminished 7 of 5. So then if you're thinking, I want to build a chord here in the key of the 5, I want to stack up thirds on G sharp and think A major. And the reason why, and this is the key of A major, right? G sharp, B, D, F sharp, that's 3 sharps. The reason why is because if you remember, half diminished 7 is diatonic to major, right? If you think of your diatonic chord qualities, right? Your major scale, if you stack up thirds on scale degree 7, you get half diminished every time. The reason why I want you to think like this is because that's so much faster than thinking, okay, I want to build a half diminished 7th chord on G sharp, and then thinking minor third, major third, or minor thirds and majors or minor 7th and all this stuff. It's just way, way, way too many possibilities for you to make mistakes. Okay, all you have to know is what's the root? It's G sharp, A major, and that's it. Stack up thirds, put the key signature on, and you got it, and it will always be correct. The trick is, and this is where it gets weird, right? Not weird, this is where it gets, particular, right? Is that it splits, right? Half diminished 7 is major. Fully diminished 7, you have to think of harmonic minor. So the key under the slash, you think of your harmonic minor scale. And the reason is, and this is what I was talking about just a second ago, is that they're diatonic to those two modes, right? 7 half diminished 7 is diatonic to major, and 7 fully diminished 7, the only place that chord is diatonic is to the raised scale degree in minor, so harmonic minor. This, again, it seems kind of cumbersome to think like, well, you think of the fully diminished as like harmonic minor under the slash, and that seems kind of weird. It's so much easier than me saying, oh, you need to write a 7 fully diminished 7 of 5 or something, and then saying, okay, F sharp, say that's the root or something. Then you have to build a fully diminished 7th chord. There's so many possibilities for making mistakes there, right? Where if you remove all of those possibilities, you just think, okay, 7 fully diminished 7, harmonic minor, built on F sharp, put the key signature on. That is predicated on, like, success is predicated on you knowing your key signatures. So if those are still rusty, right, now is the time to really, really drive home that those are solid, okay? Okay, let's try a few, okay? And for this video, this is all we're going to do is just kind of introduce the concept. In future videos, we'll put them into context for part writing, we'll do some analysis, stuff like that. But let's just kind of think through the thought process. 7 fully diminished 7 of 5 to 5. Okay. So you skip this chord, right? We're thinking about this one. What is 5 in the key of C? Well, it's G, right? Great. So that's the chord we're going to, right? And that is the key we need to think in. We need to think in the key of whatever's under the slash, right? G. However, this is where it splits, right? And this is how it's different than if this was, say, a 5 of 5 or a 5, 7 of 5. You have to think, is this chord here a fully diminished 7 or a half diminished 7? And it's a fully diminished 7, right? So that means we need to write this chord here as if it is in the key of G minor, not G major, right? So let's think G minor for a second here. Key of G minor, right? The key signature of G minor is 2 flats. And then you think up your scale. And I'm doing this just to visualize it. At a certain point, I want this to be something that's internalized for you. You can do this kind of fluently, right? But if it's not there, that's okay. Write them out. Just that's how you're going to get it internalized. It's also good practice for like your 200 level auditions and piano and everything, right, in life. Okay, so that's our G natural minor scale. We need to, from natural minor to make it harmonic minor, to find our root, we need to raise 7. And that would be this. So this is the root of this chord. We are building a chord built on F sharp in the key of G minor. That's going to happen to be written in the key of C. And this is where you're going to have tons of accidentals. And if you thought there were a lot of accidentals with the 5s and 5/7s, there's a lot more here when we get to secondary diminished chords because of this sort of like combination of minor and major keys, the splitting of like fully diminished and half diminished. So don't be freaked out. Like if you're writing, in a key and you have all these accidentals on your chord, it's probably okay. It's probably likely actually that's what you see. Okay, so we back up. We think we need to write a chord built on F sharp, but we're spelling this chord in the key of G minor. So it's F sharp, and then you make your little snowman here, right? That's your 7th chord. But this chord needs to have the key signature of G minor, which is the F sharp and 2 flats, which would be B flat and E flat. And that's the chord. And you can spell it however you want. I'm just kind of doing it here. This is a really wide voicing, but kind of cool. And then you resolve it. And the good thing is the resolution is exactly the same as you've been practicing, forever, right? So the leading tone goes up, and then your chord 7th really, 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 really wants to go down. And then you have some options here. Generally speaking, we talked about this probably last semester. I'm not sure if we've mentioned it probably in like 5 months or so here. But generally speaking, diminished intervals want to collapse. So that wants to go down to a B flat. This is a diminished 5th. It wants to go down to the B natural. It also wants to do that because C to B natural is the closest possible motion, right? And then here's where things get kind of weird, right? That could go up, but that would double a leading tone, right? The B natural is the leading tone in C. So we can't do that. And then that could go down, but what we end up with is called an unequal 5th, because this looks like parallel fifths, right? Right there, it's like, that's kind of should make your skin start to hurt a little bit when you see it. The problem is this is the only option. So it's actually not parallel fifths because this is a diminished 5th to a perfect 5th. And this is okay. I would leave this as just saying this is okay, right? And I wouldn't mark it wrong. I may show you in your homework and be like, unequal 5th, U5. The reason why I think it's okay is literally there's no other option right here. And also, like Schumann does it. Like, I mean, you see it in music. It's just not super common. The reality is, and this is what you'll actually see in your homework, is that this progression, 7 fully diminished 7 to 5, 5 to 5, rarely happens because of these problems. What happens is you'll usually see something like this, like that. And when you create these inversions, you break up the parallels and it looks a lot better. Cool. Let's try one more. Let's try 7 half diminished 7 of 5 to 5. Okay, so 7 half diminished 7 of 5. Skip that chord, right? And let's go to 5. What is 5 in the key of E flat? Because that's the key we're thinking in. And that is B flat. Okay, so we're writing the 7 half diminished 7. And since this is half diminished, we're thinking in the key of B flat major. That's the chord we're spelling there. So think in the key of B flat major, right? B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, natural, right? Because the key signature is 2 flats. That's your leading tone. And that's going to be the accidental. That's the thing we're going to have to put in to make this chromatic. So A natural, and then we spell the chord, A natural, C, E flat, and G. We check then, does this chord fit into the key of B flat major? Are there any notes in there that aren't in B flat? Nope. That's a 7 half diminished 7. you're innately going to spell a half diminished chord. Again, the other way you can do this is to think like, okay, I'm going to spell minor third, and then minor third, right? And then major third. And like that's fine. It's just way too many, error points, like contact points with counting and things like that, where you can make mistakes. And I see it a lot, where students like, they'll be like that, or not an E flat because that's in there. They'll be like, this or something. And I know what you're doing. I get it. Like you're counting and making the thirds and spelling the chord. But try not to do that. Try to use the key signatures because it's just faster. It's more fluent. Okay, so that's our chord. A natural, C, E flat, G. That's the chord we want to spell over here. So we can voice it however we want. C, E flat, and G. And there you go. So if we want to resolve this, we're going to see a problem here. And again, it's similar to the first one. This is rarely found in the wild. In fact, the 7 half diminished 7 of 5, the secondary dominant, is actually rarely found. This one, this chord, 7 fully diminished 7, and especially as like a chromatic chord, is one of the most important chords in Western music. This one is cool. It's like, you just don't see it very often. But the 7 fully diminished 7 as a chromatic chord is like profoundly important. You'll start to see that more and more as we get through more complex, theoretical stuff. The reason why I paused there, right, is because we're going to see a problem here. This needs to go up. It's the A natural. It has to go to B flat because the chord we're spelling here is B flat, D, and F. And then you resolve these things like smoothly, right? The E flat really wants to go down to the D because it's closest to D. That's a leading tone, so you can't double that. The C is closest to B flat and D. It needs to go down to B flat. It's also creating contrary motion with the bass, which is great. And then you think, okay, cool. The G wants to go down to F because that's it. Right? That would fill out the chord. The problem is you create parallel fifths. This is actually parallel fifths. That's a perfect fifth, and that's a perfect fifth. So we've broken a rule here. The reality is, like I said, you rarely see this progression like this. We'll work on them in class because I want you to practice stuff. You would have to break this somehow. So you'd have to go like, create a skip up like that to make it work. Or, and this is more likely, if this were actually in music, if you actually saw a 7 half diminished 7 of 5, it would resolve to 5/7. Because check out what happens. And this is where it's nice to be the teacher because you can change your homework, right? This is A, C, E flat, G, and then that just goes up. And it's great then, right? You kind of break the problem we had of the parallels. You do create this kind of odd parallel seventh thing, which is kind of interesting. It sounds sort of like, I don't know, jazzy, kind of like Debussy sort of thing. But it does like theoretically work then. Okay, that's the thought process. Okay, it's exactly the same. Like, I mean it in an empirical way. It's like exactly the same as what you've been doing. The only thing that's changing is this thing over the slash. And really all that's changing with that is that we need to think about this thought process. So what's under the slash, right? Okay, what key are you in? You're in the key of the 5. The 5 is, F, right? Then you think, okay, cool. Are we building a 7 fully diminished 7 or a 7 half diminished 7 of F? And then you think, okay, cool. If we're building a fully diminished 7, we need to think in F minor. If we're building a half diminished 7, we think in F major. And that's it. One thing that we didn't see here, I don't think I have a triad here. Yeah. This is possible, and we'll definitely see this on homework. I didn't have one on this prepared, but say you saw this. Right? And instead, so you're just building a triad instead of a 7th chord. What do you do, right? The answer is you can think major or minor, because think about your scale, right? Think about, if we go back here, just going back to this F major scale. If this were a triad, and this were a triad right here, what's the quality of E, G, B flat? Well, it's diminished, right? It's a diminished triad, and that's the diatonic quality on 7. Oop, no 6, but it's a fully diminished triad. It's the same thing in major, or sorry, it's the same thing in minor. So the aside here, the point of this is, didn't see one on the worksheet here, but it will happen. If you see 7 fully diminished 6 of 5 to 5, you can think, oh, cool, we'll skip this chord, go to 5, 5 is G, and then you can think in the key of G major or G minor. It doesn't matter because this is not a 7th chord. If this were 7 fully diminished 6, 5, where it had that chord 7th, this would have to be G minor. Does that make sense? This is actually fairly common. Oops. It's fairly common to see a triad like that, so it'll be easier. You can just think major or minor, but it splits when we get to diminished sevenths versus half diminished. Okay, in the next videos, as we have more of them, we'll talk about putting them in context, and especially a lot about analyzing them, looking at them in music, and how we kind of wrap our minds around it. But again, if you're feeling okay with the thought process of like thinking through how secondary function works from the 5 of 5s, this should seem very familiar. The only difference now is that we're dealing with diminish and half diminish in that like kind of paradigm. Cool. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you later.